same time, Frank Miller's run on Daredevil started to take off, and he started to take over the writing duties as well, and created Elektra in Daredevil number 168 on January of 1981, believing that superheroes needed cooler girlfriends. She was inspired in look by female bodybuilder Lisa Lyon and Roberta Mapplethorpe. Originally, Frank Miller said he wanted a more lighthearted Daredevil, but after being mugged in New York City twice while working as a writer, his tone changed. Miller managed to get away with much of the dark and violent content because, at the time, Daredevil was still a second-tier character. He took his inspiration from ninja movies and also Catholicism, as he reasoned that Matt Murdock was likely a lapsed Catholic, being a man of Irish descent who grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. John Byrne took over Fantastic Four after completing his run on the epic Days of Future Past storyline in Uncanny X-Men, and soon started a rivalry with Frank Miller. Meanwhile, Jim Starlin came through on Jim Shooter's proposal to kill Captain Marvel with the Death of Captain Marvel trade paperback, which sold to record sales, reportedly 100,000 plus, and critical acclaim in 1981. In a powerful twist, he died from cancer, having contracted it from a toxin emitted by the villainous Nitro. Starlin did it on the condition that he could publish his own created work, Dreadstar, at Epic. Jim Shooter instituted a 2-issue rule while also hiring Tom DeFalco to write Amazing Spider-Man. Meanwhile, in Fantastic Four, John Byrne used Jack Kirby's old storyboards for the cartoon for a backup story in the comic, which annoyed Kirby, who at the time was busy on Destroyer Duck, a satire of Howard the Duck meant to win his support and money for Steve Gerber in his lawsuit with Marvel. Meanwhile, Frank Miller decided to kill off his own creation, Elektra, which Jim Shooter, after the successes of Jean Grey and Captain Marvel, quickly agreed to. Over at the Uncanny X-Men, the company finally decided to take advantage of the comic's success and its most popular character with the spin-off of the miniseries Wolverine by Chris Carmack and Frank Miller in 1982. As for Spider-Man, he got a new TV series with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which featured his adventures with Iceman and Firestar. First airing on September 12, 1981, it would run for 3 seasons and 24 episodes. Jack Kirby was still causing public trouble when, in a rambling interview, he claimed he invented all the Marvel characters, including Spider-Man. While fans had defended Kirby to this point, the Spider-Man claim, which in truth he did do early work on, was also an indirect swipe at Steve Ditko and the enormous work he put into creating the character as well. At this point, Kirby started to lose his support as many fans felt his claims were just beyond reason. Stan Lee did counter that he was a company man loyal to Marvel, since he had been loyal to him all these years, and John Byrne even followed suit, stating that he understood the deal when he started working for Marvel. However, Marvel did finally introduce a royalty plan to counter DC's, which offered profit sharing for books that sold over 100,000, not just to tamp down the bad publicity, but also to get some top creators back into the fold. In Daredevil number 181, Frank Miller killed off Elektra, with the fan reaction being so negative that he got death threats and prompted an FBI investigation. It remained successful, though, and many consider Frank Miller's run on Daredevil the definitive take on the character. Nonetheless, Frank Miller soon jumped to DC when the company offered him the chance to make his book, Ronin, complete with royalties, copyright, and high-quality paper. Cloak and Dagger were introduced in the Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man number 64 in March of 1962, created by Bill Manto and Ed Hennigan. Around this time, the new Epic line was launched and was started off with Jim Starlin's Dreadstar in Epic Illustrated number 3, before getting his own comic. He was soon followed by Steve Englehart's Coyote, Steve Gerber's Void Indigo, and WX and Paul Galancey's Six for Sirius. Mark Grenwell was then promoted as editor and was quickly revered, especially his work on the Marvel Handbook. A new Captain Marvel was then introduced to keep the name, and Monica Canby, a black lieutenant with the New Orleans Harbor Police Department. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 16 in 1982, she was created by Roger Stern and John Romita Jr. with energy-based powers. She would later cede the name to Captain Marvel's son, Rambo, taking on the name Photon, Pulsar, and finally Spectrum. This was part of what Jim Shooter would call the Big Bang, in which he was going to revamp the Marvel's entire lineup, including a new Thor and a new Captain America. WMX left over his interference with Thor and Masters of Kung Fu. Then on September 22nd, artist Gene Day died from a heart aneurysm at the tender age of 31, with many attributing it to being overworked. It was a shocking death, as he was noted for his work on Star Wars and Masters of Kung Fu, along with being a mentor to future independent comic superstars Dave Sim. Ralph Macchio was promoted to editor with Spider-Woman, Ghost Rider, and Master of Kung Fu were canceled. Nevertheless, the attitude at the office was still fun, with the editorial staff making photos of themselves dressed as Marvel characters for the covers in January of 1983. Stanley even got in on the action when they convinced him to take a picture with just a comic covering his private parts. However, it was quickly photoshopped over with Lee wearing a Hulk costume. Jack Kirby kept making claims that he invented all the Marvel characters, and he continued to lose support in the process, but Marvel didn't even notice. Jim Shooter had a plan for all these characters. It was to be called Secret War, to premiere in January of 1984. Originally called Cosmic Champions, it was to be written by Shooter himself with art by Mike Zeck and John Beatty, involving a story where various Marvel characters were transported to Battle World by a being known as the Beyonder with orders to fight to the death. The idea was to bring attention to the Marvel toy line with Mattel. The title changed to Marvel Superhero, which asked that the title be changed to Marvel Superhero Secret Wars because the executives at Mattel thought that kids responded to the word secret. After the meeting, Jim Shooter felt he could write it himself, for better or for worse. Nevertheless, it ended up being a huge success, launching the company-wide crossovers as a regular event, while also introducing Spider-Man's black symbiote costume. At Thor, Walt Simonson had taken over the book in 1983 and introduced Beta Ray Bill as a possible replacement for Thor in issue number 33-37. The character was an instant smash and tied into larger sales of the direct market. Carol Callis, Marvel's first direct sales manager and VP of new products, was a large part of this, helping expand Marvel's distribution network while also working with toy companies over the upcoming Secret Wars epic, which would introduce Spider-Man's black symbiote outfit and then appear in Amazing Spider-Man number 252, which essentially sequentially sold out. Callis soon proved to be a natural at her job, earning the nickname the Mistress of Propaganda. She was instrumental in getting Marvel books in the then bookstore chains B. Dalton's and Walden Books, along with starting a cash register program in which Marvel subsidized comic book stores with cash registers after noticing that many of them didn't have them. At one point during this time, an amazing opportunity fell into Marvel's hands when they could have gotten the license to the 7 of DC's characters: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, the New Teen Titans, the Legion of Superheroes, and Justice League of America, as Warner Brothers was looking to get out of the comic books altogether to focus on making films and cartoons from the characters' license. Shooter ran the numbers and realized this could increase sales by $39 million in the first 2 years, with a profit pre-tax of $3.5 million. Plus, the idea of Marvel taking over DC's comics would be a fantastic win. Marvel actually tried, but when First Comics filed a lawsuit with Marvel and World Color Printing on February 28 for an antitrust violation over getting preferential treatment, with World Color Printing and flooding the market with new books. Marvel wasn't about to cut down their own current line, let alone add new books, so the plan was nixed. Jim Shooter's ego got out of hand at this point with the success of Secret Wars, which, while hugely successful, an objective critic could admit the writing wasn't that good. Shooter was out of control, though, and when J.M. DeMatteis planned to have Black Crow become the new Captain America, Shooter changed the story and Jim DeMatteis quit in response. Meanwhile, Bill Sienkiewicz went to work on the New Mutants, having his trademark art push the comic in crazy new directions, particularly with the character Warlock, a techno-alien that had joined the team. With the success of Secret Wars, a sequel was of course in the works with Secret Wars 2, a 9-issue event from July of 1985 to March 1986, this time with Al Milgrom as the artist, involving the Beyonder coming to Earth to discover the meaning of life. Kalish openly called it crap, but noted it did sell well, and thus company-wide crossovers would soon become the norm in comic books. DC would soon follow up with Crisis of Infinite Earths, though there was a mandate at DC to avoid being Secret War, i.e. actually be a good story. The event did affect all of Marvel and even took a jab at Steve Gerber. The comics soon became intertwined, especially the Spider-Man titles, who have had multiple comics with the Amazing Spider-Man and now with a Spider-Man, which was used to highlight his new black costume. Despite the jab in Secret Wars 2, Steve Gerber did return to Marvel to Epic with the Avoid Indigo for 2 issues. He tried to use Howard the Duck miniseries to tie in with the upcoming movie, but that fell apart as well. Gerber then left Marvel again to work as a consultant on the film. Meanwhile, Frank Miller was speaking out against Marvel over his treatment of Jack Kirby, but still produced Elektra Assassin, an 8-issue miniseries from August of 1986 to March of 1987, and Daredevil Born Again and Daredevil 227 to 233 from February to August of 1986. Over at the Uncanny X-Men, the series started to get darker as John Romita Jr. took over the artist reins. It also saw an expansion of the X titles with X Factor on February of 1986, which reunited the original team of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Angel, and Iceman. As a part of this, Jean Grey was finally brought back to life, revealing the real Jean Grey had been placed in a cocoon to heal while the Phoenix took her place in Fantastic Four number 286. Reportedly, it was Kurt Busiek who came up with this idea. This ended up ruining Chris Claremont's plans for Cyclops, who he planned to have the character retire and go off with his wife, Madeline Pryor, to Alaska. As a result, more than a few of the staff started calling X Factor Chris Busters. Nevertheless, Chris Claremont enjoyed his success and even petitioned to write Jean Grey's resurrection in Fantastic Four over John Byrne with Eric Byrne, resulting in him leaving Marvel for DC, where he was tasked with reviving Superman and Man of Steel. Denny O'Neil was then fired after successful runs on Daredevil and Iron Man, where he introduced Obadiah Stane in the Silver Centurion armor, and Miller left for DC again with David Machueli and his artists on Born Again, where they produced Batman Year One. Howard the Duck, the first Marvel comic adapted for the big screen, was released on August 1st, 1986, and promptly bombed, making only $37 million to $38 million budget. It was roundly criticized by fans and critics alike, and is still considered today one of the worst comic movies ever made. Nevertheless, it is also around this same time that New World Pictures bought Marvel outright. The new company wanted 10 more titles and then fired Jim Shooter, with Tom DeFalco replacing him as editor-in-chief. They did resolve that Jack Kirby would returning his original art, though. New World sought to expand Marvel to other mediums, and the company was renamed Marvel Entertainment to reflect that. They hit a roadblock, though, when, after realizing much of the character licenses had already been contracted out, and New World tanked in 1987 when Marvel once again being put up for sale. That was when Ron Perlman, a noted billionaire investor who bought everything from the licorice companies like McAndrews and Forbes to lipstick like Revlon, which led to many at Marvel to call him the lipstick guy, came in to buy the company through Compact Video in 1988 for $82 million. A surprise rival bidder, though, was Jim Shooter, who managed to put together an $81 million bid, but of course was just short. Later, Perlman would buy New World outright as well. Under the new ownership, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ghost Rider, Deathlock, and Nova were relaunched, and the last title character joined the new team series, The New Warriors. Epic was developed into more high-end Marvel Comics, though Archie Goodwin did end up leaving for DC in 1989. At this point, a new crop of highly detailed artists came to Marvel with Wiles Patricio, Jim Lee, and Todd McFarlane. McFarlane soon made a name for himself on Amazing Spider-Man when he co-created Venom with David Machueli in issue number 299 to 300 on April and May of 1988. By the summer of 1988, the average age of Marvel creators was under 30, but they would soon prove unruly. McFarlane wanted to form a union, and to keep him appeased, Marvel gave him his own book, Spider-Man. Another hot artist brought in was Rob Liefeld, who took over the artist reins at New Mutants and created Cable. However, he ran off Louise Simonson over Liefield's focus of fancy art over story. Nevertheless, when Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man number 1 was released in August of 1990, it sold 2.5 million copies with multiple variant covers, which soon became a trend at Marvel and other companies. With the growing success of Marvel, the McAndrews Group, which was controlled by Perlman, decided to take the company public and hike the cover prices by 33%. Carol Callis protested the direction and was replaced by Lou Blanc. Sadly, Callis would die a few years later on September 5, 1991, at the too-soon age of 36 from brain aneurysm. Recently inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2018, she remains remembered as one of the many talented women who helped shape comic book medium. Meanwhile, Liefeld and Fabian Nicieza introduced the X-Force in New Mutants number 100 in April of 1991, which would be the last issue of the series as it was revamped into the X-Force. They also introduced a certain Merc with a Mouth in New Mutants number 98, known as Deadpool. However, Chris Claremont became frustrated having to work with Jim Lee in the Uncanny X-Men, who was notoriously late, forcing Claremont to leave Marvel with Louise Simonson. Rob Liefeld was basking in his own success and celebrity, even starring in a Levi Jeans commercial directed by Spike Lee. Later, he did an interview with Stan Lee where he first mentioned the idea of his own creation, Youngblood. And we will bring that to the end of part 2. And with the next part, we are going to be getting into that next chapter in Marvel as they go to the 90s, arriving still on the success of these new creators, only to see them strike out on their own, and then Marvel will see one of the darkest periods of its history. Thank you, and go on and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And now it is November 8th, 2018, time for the favorite comic book of the week. Batman, number 58, by Tom King and Mikhail Janin, that sees the Penguin join Bane's cabal against Batman as he's released from Arkham once again with a new mission, only to turn the tables and decide to go his own way. King does a fantastic job characterizing the Penguin, who's always a delicate case, but in truth be told, he's always been one of more Batman's sane villains, which does make it strange why he's in Arkham. Nevertheless, his motivations are very, very cool, and it does